This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area. Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
Quiet on the set. Soon we will all be more informed.
We appreciate learning more of our region's news and public affairs. Cameras rolling.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. What has been referred to in South Louisiana as Cancer Alley has for too long seemed like a one-way street. Now there is hope that there may be more off-roads with the help of new pollution guidelines, though not everyone is agreeing. In eastern New Orleans, the Faubourg Brewery, for which there was once such high hopes, has hit a bump in the road, and some of its facilities are being auctioned. We'll look at these stories as well as the future of Parklets, which were intended to use public space to help bars and restaurants, and new rules for Carnival parades, including how space is used. And with Louisiana now the home of the collegiate women's national gymnastics champs, we'll look at the future prospects for women's sports. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Mike Smith, staff writer, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and Tony McCarley, staff writer of the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And we'll stay with Tony because it was announced this week that the Faubourg Brewery just didn't work, and now things are being auctioned off.
Yeah, it's a sad story for New Orleans East. It was, if you wind back about 7 years ago when Tom Benson bought the old Dixie beer brand, and the intention was to revive big-time brewing in the city. It hadn't been here since Katrina, and it's been on long decline, but it was once the brewing capital of the South, going back 100 years or so. So that was the big plan. And then after Mr. Benson died, Gail Benson invested $30 million in this facility out there. Beautiful building. There was a tap room, and there was activities and events and so on. And there was a big state-of-the-art craft brewing operation there. And the people that she partnered with then, they struggled with it initially, kind of getting the brands going. So they partnered with some investors called Made by the Water, who had been building a few brands around the South. And they initially moved all of the production down to Faubourg to kind of fulfill the capacity there that they hadn't been using. But then we learned at the end of last year, November of last year, that it wasn't working out. And according to the folks who run Made by the Water, a young guy, 30-year-old called Alexei Sekmakis, the problems included not being able to hire people for the overnight shift because of what he said were security concerns, the issues with the utilities. They had a huge disputed bill with the sewage and water folks, and other issues, big tax bill, and so on and so forth. So it was, there were problems with the business, and so now what's happening is that the entire thing there, all of the equipment down to, from the huge big brewing vats down to the outdoor furniture is all being auctioned online in a timed auction this June, and they probably won't get more than $2 million. So it's kind of the business keeps going, but that dream of having it over there in New Orleans East is dead now.
And all of these facilities, what is being auctioned, the brewing equipment, this is really unusual for, all of this to be sold all at once, right?
Yeah, I talked to the auctioneers, the people handling the auction, and they get, the business the craft brewing has been kind of leveling off. It's still doing better than regular beer, but it's been consolidating. So there've been a lot of sales of equipment, and even the auctioneer said, mom and pop size operation, but I think he said that he had not seen in the couple of decades they've been doing these auctions a full-scale facility like this being auctioned off all at once.
I keep thinking about the legacy of Tom Benson, who had such a passion for the city. He grew up here, and there's so much nostalgia, and he remembers when they were with big regional breweries, Jackson, Dixie, and Regal, and that's what he wanted to keep. He wanted to keep that presence. This was the old Dixie Brewery. And the idea with to try to bring something to the east, which badly needs something, and to make it like a festival grounds where you could have picnics, and the thing itself was supposed to be a museum. I mean, there was so much passion behind the idea. I got to tell you, when you're going somewhere and you get off points or on the Chef Highway or on the I-10 high rise, it's a hard sell.
Yeah, can I just, if there's time, let me just, I talked to, I wanted to see to what extent it was just their problem, but, so I talked to Urban South Brewery's CEO, one of the, in fact, he was recognized as one of the fast-growing businesses in the state.
That's in the warehouse area.
Last week. He's down on Chapatulas.
Yeah.
And has a decent-sized operation down there, but he was saying it's really hard for brewers to do business here because the state has laws that actually the Benson folks described to me as draconian, because to survive, a lot of these craft brewers are going into the hospitality end of the business, expanding into it. Our rules in the state here don't allow for that, and in fact, there was a bill 2 weeks ago now that was meant to loosen the rules up to allow them to do that, and it was killed by Louisiana Restaurant Association, beer distributors,
Right.
and other interests. So that's a factor.
So there was a brew pub there with Faubourg. Is that still operating right now? That's
Still
closed to?
operating until they auction all the stuff off,
Yeah.
or until they get out of the lease that they have with the owner of the building. They're the Dupuis family.
So what about the beer? Is that going to continue?
Well,
to be made?
they're brewing that out of state now. Virginia and Georgia, they've contracted that out, or in 80% of it is being contracted out, and then there's small amounts at the other ones that made by the water owns in like Florida and South Carolina and so on.
So that building, that's a big building. You said a lot of investment into this whole operation, but there are other businesses operating out of this building.
Yeah, that building is owned by the Dupuis family, who's like third generation shippers and coffee roasters. I don't know if they roast the coffee, but they store it there in that building, and they have about 80% of the building. It's only 20% that's actually been brewing. So as big as the operation was there, it wasn't taking up that much of the building.
So a disappointment for Gail Benson, but she's involved in other stuff too.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, her wealth
of course,
is
a
mostly
lot.
associated with the sports,
Right.
the sports franchises, which are the bulk of the $6
Yeah.
billion wealth. I mean, that number moves around a lot, but that's the latest one. But it actually doesn't throw off that much money. Those businesses don't earn as much as you might think. They earn less than treasury bills, for example, if you think about it that way. So other businesses that she has, like the car business that she recently expanded, she's in the real estate business. She just took over the running of some of these office buildings that are struggling. And the beer is just one of the portfolio businesses, but it was one that obviously was high profile and meant a lot to the family, as Errol was saying.
But they're not entirely giving up on that.
No, that's right. They actually they didn't talk much about it, but the brief statement that they made on it, they made a point of saying we're looking at other opportunities that is not with the partner that they had out, that they still have in that other brewing operations.
So then the remaining question is what happens with the building and that space that Faubourg occupied?
Yeah, and I mean it's a relatively minor question, but it's it'd be nice if it could be kept alive. But it's not a big foot traffic area. I mean,
Right.
you have to try harder than they tried. So.
Okay.
It never really had a chance to catch on. I mean, I myself, not that I go to a bar that often, but I would ask in the bar, "You all have Faubourg?" No. I mean, it just never caught on.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
Tough business, yeah,
Tough
and that was
business.
a tough area. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks a lot, Tony. All right, Mike, let's go on over to you because the EPA has just set some new guidelines for controlling pollution, and that's going to impact what's happening along our Mississippi River, what some folks called Cancer Alley.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was a new rule finalized and announced earlier this month, April 9th, I believe. And so, of course, it's nationwide, but Louisiana heavily implicated because of what we produce here. As you mentioned, this stretch of the Mississippi River, activists refer to as Cancer Alley. It will have a pretty significant impact there. So it's about 5 or 6 chemicals that were targeted, but 2 in particular that are linked to cancer, chloroprene and ethylene oxide. And so the acceptable levels for those are being reduced. the company, especially one company in particular that produces chloroprene, it's the only plant in the nation that supplies neoprene, which is produced from
Which
that.
company is that?
This is called Denka.
Denka, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's located where?
This
in
is
which part?
this is in St. John.
In St.
It's
John.
on the border between Reserve and Laplace.
So also, I mean, the EPA gave these companies a real limited timeline now. They reduced the timeline for making adjustments. What do these companies have to do?
So, well, for one in particular, that's been greatly reduced to 3 months. That's for the Denka plant. The others are 2 years, and that is because to make up for this exposure that the communities have already had, according to the EPA for many years. So they are under pressure to do that. They say that timeline is going to cause them to idle operations. There's 250 people who work there. They call this misguided. They say our Attorney General Liz Merle says, in her words, it's designed to close Denka. You know, and she hasn't decided yet if she's going to sue over these new rules.
Now, the EPA head has come down to Louisiana a couple of times to this area. He is really concerned about environmental injustice too, and environmental justice. And of course, activists have been just that, extremely active in that area, claiming that people are getting sick, that cancer levels are high. However, there are those on the other side who look at the tumor registry and say the data there doesn't really back up that claim.
Yeah, it's a big debate, obviously, with huge implications. So there, and you know, obviously it's very complicated. So I'll try to break it down quickly. I mean, so there's been studies on the one side showing health problems, including cancer risks and issues with children, with babies, in those areas. It's true that the tumor registry does not show, you know, what the activists say, although the authors of the tumor registry themselves say you cannot use the registry to prove that point, telling the industry can't, because it's not equipped to make those findings. It's beyond the scope of the tumor registry for a whole list of reasons. Plus, it also doesn't quantify other types of illnesses. So it's a very complicated situation, and one very sort of that people take very personally, especially the residents of that area.
The tumor registry, who is that? What is that? Is that a government registry, or is that outside?
This is produced out of LSU. Yeah, I think the numbers are not disputed. I think, but as the authors say, it's beyond their scope to be able to say, you know, these fence line communities really being affected negatively health-wise by these plants. They can't make those judgments.
Tony?
I was just going to say, Mike and I have been involved in a discussion about the terminology that kind of arose for both of us in the past week. So we've been looking at the data sets, you know, and how people are making their case with the data. And there's, you know, the industrial corridor was a 7-parish industrial corridor, which when you look at the data on the tumor registry at LSU, shows clearly higher, you know, rates amongst black men, particularly, also white men, in the old industrial corridor, and those are the people that you'd expect to both live and work in closest proximity to the emissions in these places. And what some people now are kind of saying, well, look at the 11-parish industrial corridor, which is the expanded one which includes Orleans Parish now for some reason, I'm not quite sure. And of course, that's going to skew the data. So I think the point being that when you're having this discussion and you're looking at data, you have to be very, very careful about you know, what it is you're looking at. As you know, like there's all kinds of ways to cut data and to have correlation versus causation. So I think that's in terms of the terminology anyway. That's important.
So in terms of these new guidelines or these rules from the EPA, challenges are expected to those?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, Denka's already said they're going to challenge this. If we're going to challenge it as a state, I think it remains to be seen. If Liz Merle, our Attorney General, follows her predecessor's footsteps. Jeff Landry obviously challenged a lot of EPA rules when he was Attorney General. You would probably expect that, but I think they want to study this carefully and see where to go with it.
Okay, all right. Thanks a lot, both of you guys. Okay, Errol, we're going over to you because Mardi Gras continues, as always, to be out there as a discussion point and how to make it better.
Yeah, well, every year there's some problems with Mardi Gras. It's almost impossible not to do it, but and some get solved, some don't. This year there were several, and there seemed to be more of a determination. We really need a strategy to deal with them. There were a couple of accidents of floats being too tall and tree branches knocking them over. There was a couple of crews that used these. This is the first time we ever talk about firing cannons in New Orleans. This is the Battle of New Orleans, okay? They had Mylar cannons that they fire, and which is fun to see and all of that. But what they did, they got in the power poles and turned off the electricity at the late parades. And 2 crews actually got fined for doing that. And so there was those sort of things that went on. The crew experience, there's a lot of parades back to back, and some people are making a big day out of it. And so they got people bringing sofas and tents to the neutral ground, and that's creating crowds. So they said we need to do something. So in the past, the solution has always been left up to like this Carnival Advisory Committee and the police. They get together, but now the council is getting a little bit more involved too. Well, a lot more, especially J.P. Morrell, and they started the Mardi Gras Advisory Committee. And he already said this week, I've never heard a councilman say this, that he's going to vote to pull one crew out of Mardi Gras, and that's the crew of Nick's. Which has had a lot of violations. I never heard a councilman be that aggressive and say, we're going to do that. But there's more work to be done on this. Another issue, though, is that, and they haven't talked as much about it, is what happened on Mardi Gras when the Zulu parade ran real late, and which affected the Rex parade, which it was a domino effect.
Parades.
Yeah, it affected everything on down the line. And it seems like the problem, and it's been a problem a long time, is the crowding on Jackson Avenue. Zulu is just so popular, and you have a huge crowd. And so they have to deal with that. And I think more barricades is going to be part of it. The good news is that there's goodwill between the 2 crews. The guy who's the president of Zulu, Elroy James, is also a judge. He's a first city court judge. The guy who's the captain of Rex is besides being a financial guy with a pilot in Afghanistan and Apache. Anyway, these are guys who've been in fights before, okay, and all this. But they're both the co-chairs of the Mardi Gras Advisory Committee, and I think they're going to try to work something out. And with the council sitting in, maybe they can do something. But they're going to have to do something because it is kind of overgrown what it can handle with the rules that it has right now.
And so, is this just a new approach to trying to deal with these various issues?
I think it's a new approach, especially with the city side, and especially with a council member aggressively becoming involved. I think the feeling was let these people handle it, go to the police, let the police come up with a solution. But I think people see that the seriousness of the problem because it took a long time. When you got those streets out on the parade for a long time, there's a big cost to it. Going back to the problem with the floats being too high, Barry Kern was there with Kern Studios. He says, well, the float really wasn't too high, but it's just that the floats were out too long. And they have those tandem floats that are 4 floats, back to back to back to back. And he said that's going to be they're not going to use tandem floats anymore because every time you use that, it kind of affects the direction and the turn and all that. Okay. So there's going to be a lot of rules coming down, which will probably be for the better. But the good news, there seems to be goodwill in trying to find solutions. So.
Okay, we'll see where it all goes. Okay. Thanks, C. Okay, Don, over to you. Another set of national champions coming out of LSU.
I know, LSU just keeps racking them up. This one goes to the team that was quoted as being the best team never to win a title. That has all changed. The LSU women's gymnastics team won their title this month after appearing in the finals in 2008, 9, 13, 14, 16, 17, 18, 19, 23. They finally won it all.
Solid program
in 24.
Over there.
Some super exciting news out of LSU, and that is that for 7 consecutive years, they have ranked in the top 4 for attendance at LSU gymnastics or at an NCAA gymnastics meet for the season. They had the highest attendance in the United States for 2024 for an NCAA gymnastics program. So it's a wildly popular sport in the region and in the
And
state.
Olivia Dunn herself was a big draw.
Livy Dunn is not only a super athlete, but she is a super social media star. If you don't know her, I don't know where you've been, but she created, once she joined TikTok in 2020 and first started putting out gymnastic stuff and then other social media posts, she has had 7 million TikTok followers, 4 million Instagram followers. One single social media post in June of 2023 netted her more than $500,000, according to her. So she has figured out how to get the NCAA NIL deal, the name, image, and likeness, to actually make herself a whole lot of money. She's using some of that money for a program to help other female athletes figure out how to do the same in the NIL. But she's also helped to expand the sport greatly. And she's not just the social media stud. She actually does compete and do quite well, mostly in floor events for LSU. That popularity has really led to increased popularity in the sport of gymnastics in the state of Louisiana. There are, in just the North and South Shore areas, the metro area, there are more than 7,000 kids who participate in gymnastics programs in our region. They're not all competing, they're participating. I started with my daughter, who's now almost 18, in a Mommy and Me program just for something to do. She ultimately became competitive, but there are plenty of girls and boys who just, you know, it's their rec soccer, it's their whatever, it's what they do just for fun. The gyms in our region now have wait lists to get in, so it's prime opportunity for gyms to grow or new ones to open, and this all happens before the Olympics. It's a Summer Olympics year. USA Gymnastics will be competing in Paris this summer, and that always leads to a boost nationwide in the sport of gymnastics. When the young people of America or wherever see those gymnasts on the television and they say they want to go try to do it. We are also growing now at the high school level. High school gymnastics used to be much larger in Louisiana, and then our litigious society made it very hard for a high school to have gymnastics equipment and train on site. But the LHSAA has made it easier for athletes to compete for a club and also then compete for their school. I was talking to the chair for Louisiana of USA Gymnastics today. She chairs for the state at the USA level, and her son competes for Jesuit High School. Jesuit doesn't have equipment or a team, but he competes for Jesuit High School within the LHSAA. LHSAA has 72 teams that are part of it from area high schools. So it's a growing sport. It saw a big dive during COVID, obviously, because it has to happen indoors. It is growing back to all those wait lists.
So will we see any LSU contenders in the Olympics?
We will. Aaliyah Finnegan is going for the Philippines. She will not be competing for the United States, but she is a superstar for LSU, and she will be competing in Paris for the Philippines.
All right.
But after their college or their Olympic careers, if they're lucky, there's nowhere to go, is there?
That's why the NIL is so important for those young women, because there's no other opportunity really for them to make big money in gymnastics, whereas a football player or a basketball player can go make big money playing the sport professionally. Really all a gymnast can do professionally is go coach gymnastics, and there's not a whole lot of money in that.
So Olivia Dunn has figured it out, though,
She has
obviously.
figured it
She
out,
definitely has.
and I
Okay.
think there are plenty of other people taking note of that recipe.
All right, thanks, Don. Tony, we're going to wrap it up with you. Parklets in the French Quarter. One was allowed to stay.
Yeah, I mean, it's one. They changed the laws to allow cigar bars. There's only one cigar bar. There can only be one cigar bar because of the smoking law. So the idea was to, just to allow this one guy to keep his parklet after they were banned in the French Quarter.
Let's remind people what parklets are. Too.
Sorry, they're like those terraces, little outdoor terraces that you see in Paris or New York now, where you've got seating outdoors, probably a canopy. It extends the
like beyond the
out.
curb. So this started during the pandemic.
Started during the
In
pandemic.
what used to be the parking spaces.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it goes onto the street. I mean, which is part of the debate, of course, But I mean, I think the point of this thing was that it wasn't really just about this cigar bar. It was Freddie King has, for the French Quarter anyway, has been sort of having a couple of battles with the preservationists there, trying to find compromises on some of the rules that restrict businesses down there. With good reason in many cases, but a lot of the businesses think that they're too restricted. So And there's a lot of confusing rules that govern not just the French Quarter, but particularly the French Quarter in terms of doing business and making changes to your business and all that kind of stuff.
So
it's
after
part
the
of an ongoing
pandemic, then
fight.
you sort of clawed back this whole parklet idea. Is that the issue there? And now this one guy is going to be able to maintain his with the cigar bar in the quarter?
So what happened was that you couldn't have parklets in Orleans Parish. Then the pandemic came, and then after the pandemic, they said, okay, well, let's, a lot of the businesses said, there were dozens of them around the city. They said, let's allow them with certain rules, except in the French Quarter and except on a strip of Magazine Street from Washington to Louisiana. And then there was confusion over the rules. I think confusion is the operative word here, because they didn't really kind of sort it out how these things would work. And one of the issues that they left was on Frenchman Street, which is obviously just adjacent to the French Quarter, you can have the parklets now, which means that they can kind of grandfather in smoking in some of these establishments, which puts some of the French Quarter businesses would argue puts them at a disadvantage. So they kind of Frankenstein the rules a little bit. And left some gaps, as often happens with these things.
But not everybody's happy with this decision, as you say.
No. The preservationist people the people who look at the French Quarter rules and keep watch over them were unhappy. They were campaigning against it because they thought it would open the floodgates. There's 3 others that have not complied with the rules in the French Quarter yet, as well as the cigar bar. And the person that was advocating for the cigar bar was saying, it is only for the cigar bar, but really we should allow the French Quarter to have parklets, and that's our real intention. So the debate will go on, no doubt.
It definitely will. All right, Tony, thanks a lot. All right, guys, other stories. E, over to you.
A huge week or huge month in New Orleans, but this week, we have the Jazz Fest at both weekends on both sides. We have the golf tournament this weekend. Plus, New Orleans and Company, the agency that goes out and promotes tourism, is saying this week there's going to be 7,000 orthodontists in New Orleans. Out there, I guess, just pulling for the Jazz Fest or something. But anyway, it's going to be a lot of people. This is what we were yearning for back in the COVID days.
Yeah.
This is it. This week.
Is it.
Okay.
It's happening now. Okay, E, thanks. Mike, over to you.
Yeah, so 2 coastal issues are huge in Louisiana, as everybody knows. So 2 things to keep an eye on. One is the governor going to eventually merge our coastal agency with the energy offices, which a lot of coastal advocates are worried about, that this could deprioritize our long efforts in restoring the coast. And second, related, what's going to happen with the big Mid-Barataria sediment diversion, which is aimed at rebuilding a lot of the coast through diverting part of the Mississippi River. A lot of legal challenges happening with that, and that's going to be playing out in the months ahead.
Okay, thanks a lot. Don.
Let's stick with sports and sports gaining popularity. Lacrosse, one of the oldest sports in the nation, finally gaining some ground in Louisiana. The state championship is being fought for in Baton Rouge on Saturday. But the sport should be recognized by the LHSAA next year and competes for the first time in the Olympics in 2028.
Okay, very good. Tony, real quick.
Good news story. Robert H. Tucker, one of the well-known civil rights leaders in the city, his daughter, I Am Tucker, was named the Louisiana Business Person of the Year. She's a former Baton Rouge police person. And she's up in Washington this weekend with a shot at being the National Small Business Association Person of the Year.
Great, congrats to her. All right, good news indeed. Thanks a lot, guys, for being here, and thank you all for joining us. See you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
Public television is our passion. With so much content that WYES broadcasts and presents online, we are quite entertained and highly informed.
Please join us in supporting WYES.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.